The context and directions of Australian education. Is it just a little bit of history repeating? Industrialisation in Britain saw the move from subsistence agrarian society to a society focused around the factory and the city. Education for the growing middle class and workers was entering the cultural discourse. Britain was bulging at the seams and began to move her convict population to Australia. The new colony was in need of educating, to save them from themselves. Early schools were rudimentary and often run by different religious groups. Education was seen to civilise, encourage good moral character and create loyal British subjects. Australia was riding a wave of gold, and with that marvellous Melbourne had seen a rapidly increasing population. A new educational reform was about to occur, which would change education in Australia from then on, the Victorian Education Act. Free, secular, compulsory. It created one centralised education body, separated secular from religious instruction, abolished fees and mandated attendance for children between the ages of 6 and 15. Frustrations surrounding a duplicated education system and a fear of sectarianism were just some of the reasons a move towards compulsory education was pursued, and was possible. The prosperous years, the 1870s to 1880s. With the new Act in place, building boomed and distinctive red brick schools sprang up all over Victoria. In 1901 there were over 9,000 schools in Australia, with more than 850,000 pupils. Most were state schools. The bulk of these were one-teacher schools with enrolments of between 10 and 30 students. The small rural school was often the centre of community life. One of the major areas of change has been in the area of secondary schooling. The economic condition of the family was central to students participating and finishing school. During the Depression years, my maternal grandmother and paternal grandfather did not proceed past primary school, as both were needed by their families to enter the workforce. In the mid-20th century, Australia was riding on the sheep's back and enjoying a long economic boom. Secondary schooling was able to become a priority for the government and for families. Australia was changing economically, politically and socially. Change does not happen overnight. In fact, many things need to occur for change to happen. The monolithic structure of the education system in Australia is just one of the hurdles for change. Social movements such as the feminist movement and human rights movement can affect change. With the 1960s and 70s feminist movement, the opportunities for boys and girls changed. Where once technical courses were separated by gender, now boys can do textiles and girls can do woodwork. Change also happened for our female teachers. Married teachers were allowed to work again and equal pay was achieved in 1968. In times of change, society's attitudes to many of its child-rearing practices are also reviewed. My father remembers keenly being caned for mistakes he made whilst reading in school. My mother still remembers having to hide that she was left-handed or been rapped over the knuckles. Some debates have been revisited many times in the last century. Performance pay may seem like a modern debate. However, we first visited this debate in 1864. A payment by results system was implemented. It was met with praise and derision, just as it has in 2013. Often we think of education of times gone by as merely the 3 R's. However, there have been progressive educationalists since before Federation. One example is Frank Tate, who was appointed Director of Education in Victoria in 1902. He promoted child-centred pedagogy. Child-centred learning is not necessarily still popular today. The current classroom structure is quite entrenched. Even in this imagined future classroom, we can recognise it as a classroom. It would take changes in many contexts for education to change radically. Advances in technology in all areas, information technology, transport, energy, and a booming economy. Future directions most likely will be additions and improvements to the already existing structures and facilities.
The online world will increasingly become part of the Australian classroom. Students will have greater access to technologies at home and at school, at faster speeds, and in user-friendly formats. Textbooks and exams will move online, and students will be able to interact with other classrooms around the world. Online personal learning coordinators will help students track their growing knowledge and interests. What will the future of education hold? Futurist, Professor Neil Selwyn, from the Faculty of Education at Monash University, remains skeptical about the speed of change in education, stating earlier this year, "Most of what the scientists say will happen in 10 years will happen in 50. There is lots of hype about how much technology will change the learning environment, but schools are resilient. We still recognize them from when we were at school. They still have rows of desks, a whiteboard and a teacher, so maybe it won't change as much as we think."
Our future classrooms may resemble the Star Trek holodeck. It is possible.